businesses. What would it take to change that mindset? And I'm going to start with the congressman because he is fighting the good fight and just succeeded in...
We will leave this event from CPAC at this point. You can see it in its entirety and all of our CPAC coverage online at cspan.org. The U.S. Senate is about to gavel in. Senators will begin the morning with debate on the 2014 federal budget. Votes on 5 amendments are set for 11 this morning. That'll be followed by further amendment debate and then a vote-a-rama, a series of continuous votes on amendments. And now to live coverage of the U.S. Senate here on C-SPAN 2.
Let us pray. God of love and grace, our love is pale and fitful compared to your infinite goodness. Inspire our lawmakers with your guiding power so that they will pursue paths of peace and justice for all. Keep before them your vision of bringing deliverance to captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, and permitting the oppressed to go free. Use them as healers and helpers and heralds of your good tidings to our nation and world. Assure them of your love as you give them eyes to see your saving truth. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me now in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., March 22, 2013. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Angus S. King, Jr., a senator from the state of Maine, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President pro tempore.
Mr. President?
The Majority Leader.
It's my understanding that we are on the budget resolution. That's true, isn't it? It's been reported.
Will report.
Calendar number 28, S. Conres 8, concurrent resolution setting forth the congressional budget for the United States government for fiscal year 2014 and so forth.
Mr. President, until 11 o'clock, there's going to be conversation here on the Senate floor. At 11 o'clock, there will be 6 roll call votes. Offices, senators should understand. The first vote will be 15 minutes. After that, 10 minutes. As we said yesterday, and we enforced it yesterday, when the time's up, we're closing it. If Republicans aren't here, too bad. Democrats aren't here, too bad. We're going to have a lot of votes today. So make sure everyone's here and understand if you're not, clerks have been asked to turn the vote in. After the votes that we complete, the 6 roll call votes starting at 11, there'll be 2 hours of debate remaining on the resolution. Therefore, unless something untoward happens, the vote-a-rama is expected to begin around 3 p.m. this afternoon. I would hope everyone would understand that we've had about 400 amendments filed. 400. We're not going to do 400 amendments. The average that we have on these vote-a-ramas is between 25 and 35, and so everyone should understand that's about where we should wind up. Everyone is going to be everyone will be tired. The 2 managers have worked very hard on this for a long time, so be considerate of their time, thoughts, and efforts also. Mr. President, S649 is at the desk, and it's due for a second reading.
Clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
S649, a bill to ensure that all individuals who should be prohibited from buying a firearm are listed in the National Instant Criminal Background Check System and require a background check for every firearm sale and for other purposes.
Mr. President, in relation to the Safe Communities, Safe Schools Act, I would object to any further proceedings at this time.
Objection having been heard, the measure will be placed on the calendar. And under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the time until 11 a.m. will be equally divided and controlled between the two managers or their designees. The Senator from Washington.
Mr. President, I want to thank Ranking Member Sessions once again for another good day of vigorous debate. There are clearly some differences between us here in the Senate, but all of our constituents benefit from having those views laid out and expressed clearly, and I really appreciate all that he is doing to help us move along, as well as the good debate that we're having. Mr. President, yesterday the Senate did vote to reject the idea that balancing the budget by an arbitrary date should come before middle-class families and broad-based economic growth. Last night the Senate voted to continue down the path towards a truly balanced approach to tackling our economic and fiscal challenges. The kind of approach that cuts spending responsibly and calls on the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations to pay their fair share. We voted on an approach that puts our economy first and foremost and makes sure that we are protecting, not threatening, our fragile economic recovery. That is the kind of approach that is supported by the vast majority of the American people, and the Senate stood strongly behind that. Mr. President, the Senate strongly rejected the budget that passed the House of Representatives yesterday. Their budget would meet the goal by balancing by an arbitrary date, but would do it in a way that would be devastating for our families and the economy, dismantling Medicare, and ending up cutting taxes for the rich while raising them on the middle class. And not only that, but it did rely on gimmicks and tricks to hit that arbitrary date. There's nothing balanced about that kind of approach, and I'm very glad that every member of the Senate had an opportunity to be clear about where we stand on that. Mr. President, the Senate also voted yesterday to specifically reject the idea that Medicare should be dismantled or voucherized, and I'm glad we had strong bipartisan support on that amendment. We also voted clearly for the idea that while both sides favor closing tax loopholes and ending wasteful deductions that favor the wealthiest Americans and biggest corporations, the Senate thinks some of that revenue should be used to tackle the deficit and invest in the middle class, not be used just to simply cut tax rates for the rich the way that the House budget did. So, Mr. President, we have a few more hours of debate this morning between now and 11, followed by some votes, and then we will close out debate and move on to all the rest of the votes that we will take before a final passage sometime late tonight or early tomorrow morning. As the Senate Majority Leader said, we have hundreds of amendments filed. If we were to vote on every one of them, we would be here voting every single hour all the way through Monday or Tuesday, and I know most members know that that's not going to happen. So I would really encourage every member of the Senate to work with the manager on their side to let us know which amendments are your priority so we can get them up as sooner rather than later and vote on the ones that you want us to. So I urge all of our colleagues to work with us and our staffs and with Ranking Member Sessions and his staff to make sure we know what your priorities are, how you'd like to proceed, and we will work with everyone to help combine some similar amendments. Obviously, among those 400, there's a number that are similar. We will try and clear as many non-controversial amendments by voice vote as we can, and we will get through as many votes as possible in a fair and reasonable manner, and look forward to working with Senator Sessions to make sure we can do that. So thank you very much, Mr. President. I encourage our colleagues, you have just a bit more time to have your say here before we will be just voting, so if you would like to have your say, please make sure our staffs know when you come down and make your statement. With that, I will yield to my colleague, Senator Sessions.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
I've enjoyed working with Senator Murray. She's a strong leader. She makes clear decisions and sticks by them and executes them. So you have to respect that, all within the rules of the chair of the committee. We've disagreed on a number of things, and our vision for the financial future of America is quite different. I can understand how difficult it is to produce a budget. That's not an easy thing to accomplish. And when you've got a divergent caucus, it's particularly difficult. Politico said the budget was written by the left of the Democratic caucus to the left of President Obama. I think that's probably correct. It's a very big spending, big tax budget. It is the wrong thing for America. It's the wrong thing for economic stability. It's the wrong kind of plan, if made into law, to help us grow our economy, create jobs, create wealth, get people overtime and bonuses and pay raises, the kind of thing you have when the economy is growing. This budget is just the wrong medicine. I just have to say, I strongly, strongly believe that it takes us in the wrong direction. What does it do at bottom? It raises taxes. It raises taxes, according to the chairman, by $1 trillion, $985 billion. That's almost $1 trillion. And we think it raises it $1.5 trillion. There's a reserve fund to make it easy to raise more taxes, and I asked the chair to close that so it couldn't be used to raise taxes easily, and she declined, which would continue to cause me to believe that that is an additional part. But regardless, $1 trillion in new taxes is a huge, huge tax increase. In January of this year, the president got a $650 billion big tax increase on the rich. And so this is a huge additional tax cut, plus $1 trillion in tax cuts in the president's health care bill. So we are already at $1.6 trillion in new taxes, proposing in this budget at least another $1 trillion. So that's not healthy for the economy. We all know when you extract more wealth out of the economy, it does have effects. One of them is it weakens the economy and strengthens the central government. And the central government is not managing the people's money well. And we have no interest, it appears, from this budget of listening to the American people and running their government better, leaner, more productive, get more bang for the buck. What do? We ask for more money. We haven't done anything wrong. Send us more money. And I have to urge my colleagues to honestly examine what the budget does. In addition to raising taxes, you would think that would help us. They say they have a balanced approach. We started counting how many times my Democratic colleagues used the word balance. I think it suggests a guilty conscience myself, because the budget in no way comes close to balancing a budget. Doesn't pretend to. It explicitly rejects it. Not an arbitrary date, not any date. Not any date does it propose balancing the budget. And in fact, because it makes no changes in the drivers of our debt, the big entitlement programs, the big welfare programs, the interest on the debt, none of those are constrained by this budget. We know the next 10 years that are outside the budget window will even be worse. They will be on an unsustainable course, accelerating even off the course we're on today, which is unsustainable. So I am really disappointed. Everybody that's been involved, everybody that's participated, whether it's a gang of 6, a committee of 12, as our chairman did, the fiscal commission, all of those who participated know that nearly 60% of the money the government is now spending, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, interest on the debt, food stamps, those programs are out of control. They're entitlements, meaning we've set up legal standards that if those standards are met, you walk into the government office and demand the money. And they have to give it to you. And if they don't, you sue the government. I'm 68 years old. I want my Social Security check. We can't say we don't have any money. So this is the kind of thing that needs to be fixed now. It needs to be discussed now. every expert is an independent advisor to the government has said, you guys need to get together and fix this. So what the budget before us today says is nada. We're not going to fix any of that. We have no plans to construct any of that. And any of you guys that suggest that these programs have to be changed, we say you don't like old people. We say you don't like poor people. We say you don't want people to have food. That's what we say, attack, 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 when everybody knows change must occur. We know that. And it's not in this budget, nothing in the budget. So we don't change the programs that are within the budget. And I suggest that's not responsible. I suggest that's not a budget worthy of a party that says they want to lead America. The great Democratic Party is absolutely refusing to confront the great financial issues of our time. No, we won't talk about it. And if you do, we're going to attack you, Paul Ryan, because you have a creative, insightful way to preserve Medicare and make it more healthy in the future and put it on a sound path. We're going to say you're trying to destroy Medicare. He's got a plan to save Medicare, bring it into the 20th century, 21st century, and make things better. It ought to be discussed openly and fairly, not demonized. So that's the level of debate we're in here. And so in private, we talk to our colleagues, and they say, yes, we need to make changes. We really do. Well, when? And when the paper is printed, the budget is printed, it's not there. It's not there. So there's no reform of the fundamental drivers of our debt. We also know that last year we spent $750 billion on 83 government social welfare programs, means-tested programs. That is, if your income is below a certain level, the government deems you worthy of subsidy of some kind. Now, these 83 programs, many of them are duplicative. There's not a coherent focus to them that endeavors to help the people really, other than giving them money, giving them aid. There's not a sufficient focus in all of these programs in actually helping that struggling mother with children who's out of work, who lost their job, who can no longer get overtime or bonus pay, and young people who are struggling to get up on the ladder of work and prosperity. This is not helping them, and these programs are just temporary. We've got billions going out with unemployment insurance, food stamp, temporary assistance to needy families, earned income tax credit, all of these programs. It's time for us to begin a massive overhaul, review of all of these programs, and several things could happen. One of them is we can make them better, and we can actually create programs that allow each person in their time of need to get temporary assistance, to be able to refocus their lives, to move on to the workforce, help them find the training that they need to get into areas that need jobs right now, and help them move forward. But you know what we have in our Senate and among a lot of members of the House? We have a goal to see how many more workers we can bring in without effectively helping American workers who are unemployed. We've got an immigration policy that says we got jobs, we don't have enough workers. That's what the businesses are telling us. We don't have enough workers. They ought to add, when they send us that message, Mr. President, they ought to say, and by the way, you need to give more welfare and more aid to people that don't have jobs. Now, what's the disconnect there? We need to be protecting American citizens who are here out of work, hurting today, minorities, blacks and whites and all colors and races that are hurting today with high unemployment, And we seem to be more focused on how we can ram through this Senate a bill that would legalize millions and create an even more robust guest worker program. There's not enough jobs now. Give me a break. So we're talking about $750 billion going out now in these 83 programs, projected to go up 80% in the next decade. That the total of those programs go up 80% in the next decade. You know, we've calculated those numbers, and if it went up 60%, it would save $1 trillion. I think we could make those programs more effective, helpful, organized in a way that really advances the needs of poor people and save $1 trillion. That ought to be our goal. We'll let it grow as much as we have to have it grow to take care of people in need. We're going to make sure people have their needs met in America that are struggling out there. But at the same time, it can be done better, and every American knows it. They'll talk to you when you ask them about it. They're uneasy about the easy money and the feeling that this system isn't working when it comes to government assistance. And I think they're right, don't you, colleagues? I really think so. So what does that mean? That means we should be having hearings and doing work to fix it, which we're not doing. Now, the challenge of our time is the unsustainable debt course this country is on. The challenge of our time is for us to demonstrate that we've made the changes necessary to place this economy on a sound footing. I believe that the great minds of our time are not as smart as they think they are. I believe that in 2001, when Chairman Greenspan of the Fed came before the Budget Committee and talked about what we were going to do when the entire debt of the United States was paid down, and he worried we wouldn't know what to do with the money. And of course, we were in a recession within a few months, and now we see demographically we're on an unsustainable debt course. Now the new Fed chairman, Mr. Bernanke, as the Wall Street Journal documented, was promoting Mr. Greenspan to spend more money and keep loose money before the housing crisis. Just the exactly wrong advice. He didn't see it coming. He didn't see it coming. So we're not so smart around here. I'm worried about the future. What do I think responsible government policymakers should do? They should just provide a good, solid framework for the vibrant free market economy in this country to flourish. And we can't be the kind of off and on again faucet for money and taxes and spending and not spending and bouncing around here trying to pass laws every few months to meet what's perceived as the financial goal of somebody on Wall Street at that moment. We're not able to do that. What we should do is lay out a strong, clear policy, adhere to it, and let the business people risk their money with some ability to ascertain what those risks are, not expecting the government to come in and alter the situation, the rules of the game a few months down the road. That's what we should do, create a sound framework. We're not doing that, and I'm concerned about it. Finally, this budget increases spending. It increases spending very dramatically at a time when we don't need to be increasing spending at this rate, and we're increasing spending above the rate we're currently set to operate on, the Budget Control Act line, which allows for increasing every year spending, but this budget spends more than that, and it raises $1 trillion in taxes at least, and it expends all those new taxes, eats that up with new spending. Had we stayed on the current, if it called for us to stay on the current baseline of spending growth that's going up, and we raised $1 trillion in taxes, we would have $1 trillion in reduced deficit. over the next 10 years. But it spends more money, and it eats up the new taxes with new spending. It really does. This is a failed plan that's been produced by the majority party in the United States Senate. We can't raise, when people heard this is what's being said to the American people, and we all know it. The Democratic leadership is saying, we've got a budget that's balanced. And what does that mean? It means, well, we're going to pay down the debt, but it's not all going to be cutting spending. We're going to pay down the debt by raising taxes and cutting spending. Raise taxes $1 trillion, cut spending $1 trillion. We have a $2 trillion reduction in the deficit. Doesn't that sound good? That's kind of the things American people would like to hear. It's not enough. We could do more and don't have to do a lot more, and we'll have a budget balance. But it doesn't do that, colleagues. It doesn't. It raises taxes $1 trillion, but it raises spending $1 trillion. It doesn't cut spending $1 trillion. It raises spending. And therefore, we got no deficit reduction at all, but we have a new $1 trillion tax. The government is saying to the American people, we need more money. We don't have any way to cut any spending, and that anybody proposes that there are abuses in the food stamp program or there are abuses in other programs out there, that we're wasting money on energy loans by the billions, Solyndras and A123s and those kind of companies. They're saying all of that, but we can't save any money. There's no money to be saved. You just send us more money, and then we will pass it around, and this will stimulate the economy. So I'll conclude. I see we've got some colleagues that are here. I'll just say this. The debt that we have today, I have become absolutely convinced, is too high. The gross debt of the United States is 104% of our economy. It's above our GDP, which is almost $17 trillion. That debt is almost $17 trillion now. What we've seen from the Rogoff and Reinhardt study and from recent reports by the International Monetary Fund, report by the European Central Bank, report by the Bank for International Settlements, all say when debt is as high as we are today in the United States, that begins to pull down growth. So my colleagues claim that they have a budget. They have a budget that will help create jobs. I would say, with all respect, we have a disagreement. You believe you can tax more and spend more and borrow more, and that will somehow create growth and prosperity. I believe we've had 4 years of that experiment, which I fundamentally doubted and opposed from the beginning, and it hasn't worked. You can't take a bucket of water from one end of the pool and pour it in the other and gain from it, especially when the bucket's going to leak a good bit of it in the process. So what I would say is the debt now is so high, according to all of those reports, the debt of the United States is in the zone that they craft, that they have analyzed. When your debt gets into that zone, you lose growth. All of those reports, Rogoff and Reinhardt, IMF, European Central Bank, the Bank of International Settlements, we're in that zone. So if we want to have growth, we're going to have to make our government leaner. We're going to have to begin to get our budget under control and balance it. And if you balance it by allowing growth to occur at 3.4% without having to cut over 10 years, but if you allow our growth to increase at 3.4% instead of 5.4%, the budget balances. So we don't have to slash and burn, but we do have to get off the course we're on, which isn't easy, but that's what we're paid to do, to be responsible. So if we got off that course, begin to see our debt to GDP go down, which a balanced budget, even over a 10-year responsible period, would do, then we can actually honestly say we've strengthened America, we've put us on a sound path, we've allowed the economy to grow again. And there is no doubt in my mind, colleagues, and I doubt yours, that if the world were to see that the United States was on a path to a balanced budget, wow, they would say, really? This death spiral the United States and all these big, fat Western nations have been on, maybe others can do this too. Maybe this is the place to invest our money. I believe it would help growth, help investment, help put the country on a sound path, and I'm disappointed this budget doesn't do it. I respect my colleagues. We had a great time in the committee. We've had a good time on the floor. Senator Murray is a good chair. But the left, I guess, of the Democratic caucus has produced a budget here that won't work. It does not meet the challenge of our time. It's deeply disappointing. I guess there's still some chance something might happen in conference, but from the looks of this budget, the chances aren't very great, I have to say. Mr. President, I thank the chair for this opportunity and would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I'd like to yield 10 minutes off the resolution to my friend and colleague, Senator Mikulski, the chair of the Appropriations Committee. Senator.
Senator from Maryland.
Thank you very much, Senator Coons. I probably won't take 10 minutes, but what I speak about is really indeed compelling. Later on, during the vote-a-rama, I will be offering an amendment that will create a reserve fund that, should we pass the Paycheck Fairness Act, it will in no way negate the spending within our budget. It is essentially the functional equivalent of a sense of the Senate resolution that the Senate should pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. We talk a lot about growing the economy. The economy will grow when people work. The people that are entering the workforce that have been one of the driving forces for the last 30 years are women. And though we are in the workforce, full force, we are still not being paid equal pay for equal work. It is outrageous. And if you want to grow the economy, pass paycheck fairness where we are not harassed for simply trying to find out what is our pay, how can we get equal pay for the same job. Women across America are worried about staying in the middle class if they're already there and getting to the middle class if they're not there. Nearly 50 years after the passing of the Equal Pay Act, women still get paid less than men. This budget is a reflection of our values and priorities, and eliminating the wage gap should be one. For years, I and other colleagues have fought for paycheck fairness. Under that act, no longer would employers be able to retaliate against workers for sharing information about wages. Right now, if you ask someone what you get paid, you can get fired. This bill follows on from the famous Lilly Ledbetter Act. Lilly herself was humiliated and harassed because she tried to find out what she was making. No longer will women be able to seek only back pay when they are discriminated against. Under this bill, they could also seek punitive damages. No longer would employers be able to use almost any reason for paying a woman less. Oh, the men do harder jobs. Oh, they have a better education than you. And in fact, the reverse is happening. Women entering the workforce are often better educated with more academic and trade certifications than men who are doing it. And women are also doing hard and dangerous jobs. We can look at what they do in the military. They can look at how we see them as firefighters and police officers and prison guards. Under the legislation I'm proposing, no longer will women be on their own and fighting for equal pay or for equal work. In this country, we say work hard and play by the rules, you'll get ahead. We work hard every day, but we find that the rules are different for women and for men. Actually, the rules in many workplaces are rigged against us. So, Mr. President, I would hope that we would pass my amendment today that would allow us to be able to go forward later on in the year and pass paycheck fairness. It is important to the women in the workplace, and it's important to our economy. Much is being said here about being pro-growth. Who isn't pro-growth? Of course we want to grow our economy. And if we look at the tax structure, I believe we should reward, right now, the tax structure is tilted. And the tax breaks that we serve is to reward people who make money off of money, not people who make money off of products or the sweat of their own brow. And so, Mr. President, I think that we need to take a look at the tax code. In my state, we are an entrepreneurial-driven state. We are the innovation economy in biotech, cybertech, space tech, and at the same time, we have people work hard every single day in agriculture, in poultry, in mining, in trying to earn a living by really very hard work. And I believe we should have a tax code that rewards it. I yield the floor.
How many minutes are remaining, Mr. President? How many minutes are remaining on our side?
48 and a half.
Thank you. Mr. President, we've heard a great deal about balance in the debates on the floor, and as we move towards voting on a budget resolution, I just want to remind all of us here in this chamber today to keep in mind that a balanced path forward has broad support across all of America. Folks are looking for us to take a path towards steady and responsible deficit reduction, investing in growing our economy, investing in helping our private sector grow good jobs, while still honoring the pledges we've made to America's veterans, to our seniors, to those who rely on some of our most important and most treasured federal programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. There's a sharp contrast, and that contrast will be clearer and clearer as this day goes on, between the values embedded in the Ryan budget passed by the House and the budget led ably by Chairman Murray and the Senate Democrats in the Budget Committee that will be taken up later today. We will be considering dozens, perhaps hundreds of amendments that will touch on a very wide range of issues, from paycheck fairness and gender equity, as referenced by Senator Mikulski just a few moments ago, to issues very widely ranging, ones that I've helped champion on the Budget Committee that would increase investment in manufacturing and making sure that our manufacturing sector is more competitive, ones that allow us to strengthen our R&D sector, strengthen our education sector, ones that ensure that we preserve and protect these valued Medicare and Medicaid programs that I referenced. But more than anything, Mr. President, I think at the end of the day, the challenge on all of us is to help the American people understand the fundamental difference in values reflected in these two different budgets. And I know I'll be joined in just a few minutes by colleagues who are coming to speak to that point to help lay out for the American people the fundamental difference between these two budgets. But if I might, sort of at the highest level for a moment, I wanted to remind folks who might be watching, folks in the chamber, that a budget resolution is quite different from the budgets that, Mr. President, you might have been used to as a governor, that others of us were used to from the private sector or from state or county or city government. A budget resolution doesn't have in great detail every single item to be spent by this government. As state budgets are submitted to general assemblies or legislatures, they typically have in enormous detail exactly how the state will spend its funds in the year ahead. This budget resolution sets a framework. It sets sort of top-level spending targets and then directs the committees of jurisdiction to achieve either changes to the tax code, Finance Committee, or changes to vital programs in other committees, whether defense or help or others. So when we talk often about the values embedded in a budget resolution, that's in part because a budget resolution is just the beginning of a regular order, healthy budget process. It then has to be complemented with authorization bills and with appropriations bills. But if you compare the budget resolution that's already been adopted in the House and that was rejected in a vote here on the floor last night with the budget resolution that's come out of the Senate Budget Committee, I think you see a few simple, stark differences. Both budget resolutions raise a significant amount of revenue through tax reform by closing so-called tax loopholes or cutting spending through the tax code. This is spending that isn't reviewed every year. This is spending that often has been stuck into the tax code through the efforts of the wealthy and well-connected, powerful interests in our country that don't get reviewed every year. And it is time for us to look seriously at our tax code to make it leaner, easier to understand, easier to enforce, more efficient, and to make our country more competitive. But a core question we have to address, Mr. President, is to what end do we put the revenue raised through changes to our tax code? In the House budget resolution, they raised, if I remember, roughly $5.7 trillion over the 10-year budget period, all of which is dedicated to reducing the tax rates on the wealthiest Americans and on the most profitable corporations, reducing rates on corporations and individuals. The much smaller amount raised in our budget plan, $975 billion over 10 years, through cutting spending through the tax code, is dedicated to deficit reduction. The balanced path that we've talked about that balances reduction in the deficit through new revenue raised by reforms to the tax code with comparable spending reductions across all areas of our budget is the sort of balanced plan that was on the ballot, that was a critical part of the 2012 election process, and that I frankly think the American people have broadly embraced. We've put forward a budget that meets the values agenda that our Democratic Budget Committee stands behind, to invest in critical areas of our economy, whether infrastructure, education, or R&D, to help lift the private sector and help grow jobs again, to keep our most vital commitments to seniors and to veterans and to those most at risk in our society, while still making responsible, steady progress towards reducing our crippling deficit and debt. We get the deficit down to less than 3% of GDP. At the end of the 10-year period, we stabilize our publicly held debt at 70% of GDP. These are the targets broadly agreed on by every major bipartisan group that has looked at the challenges facing the United States, our economy, and our budget. I'll remind you that the Bowles-Simpson Commission, a bipartisan commission, came up with a rough target of $4 trillion in savings over a decade. This plan, this budget resolution, would achieve, in fact, would exceed that target in a way that has balance and that I believe is responsible. I'd be happy to talk further then, if I might, Mr. President, about some of the other issues contained both within our budget resolution and in contrast with the budget resolution coming over from the House. As a number of my colleagues have spoken about movingly on the floor in recent days, one of the most important differences is in the future of the fundamental entitlement programs that are a part of the progressive legacy of FDR and LBJ and that were put in place really with both Republicans and Democrats over many years, strengthening and sustaining them. We see a fundamental difference in direction between what's happened in the House and what we propose here in the Senate. In the House, to put it simply, they would change Medicare from a federal guarantee, from a program that provides health care to millions of Americans, to a voucher program. One where what the federal government provides is not a guarantee, but premium support, a voucher, something that would shift costs onto seniors, onto states, and onto communities. And in Medicaid, in my view, even worse, because it supports the most vulnerable in our country. They would turn it into a block grant. This would shift more than $800 billion onto the balance sheets of states. To talk further about these important differences in the values between the House and the Senate budgets, and to talk about its impact on the future of the United States, I'd like to yield 7 minutes to my colleague from the state of Rhode Island, Senator Whitehouse.
Rhode Island.
Thank you, Senator Coons. The Senate budget resolution that we worked so hard on would first replace the harmful budget sequester whose effects are only beginning to be felt in our communities with balanced deficit reduction. Second, it would invest in our crumbling roads, bridges, and water infrastructure. Our engineers give our infrastructure a D+. Clearly, we need to make that investment. And it would support continued job creation and economic growth. Despite this sensible, balanced approach, not a single Republican supported this budget in committee. Republicans prefer to raid the programs that the middle class depends on, while protecting the rich and the well-connected. A CBS News poll conducted last September shows that 78% of Americans favor continuing the current guarantee of Medicare coverage for seniors. 78%, but the Republican budget would gut Medicare, turn it into a voucher program,
for those 55 and under, basically put Medicare into a death spiral, and it would end the Medicare guarantee that for half a century has been the pillar of American retirement. More than 3 million seniors right now save an average of $700 a year on prescriptions because we closed the dreaded donut hole. Well, the Republican budget throws them right back in the donut hole, forcing today's seniors to pay an additional $700 a year on average out of pocket. 60 million Americans got to college and were able to seize their dreams because of Pell Grants. The Republican plan cuts Pell Grants, dropping an estimated million students from this vital program. This Ryan Republican plan to turn Medicare into a voucher program is so extreme and so radical that even Republicans are speaking out against it. Congressman David McKinley voted against the Ryan budget, and he said, "My home state of West Virginia has the highest percentage of Medicare beneficiaries in the country, and I cannot support a plan that the Congressional Budget Office has determined would nearly double out-of-pocket health care costs for future retirees." And of course, former Speaker Newt Gingrich described this plan as right-wing social engineering. This Republican budget makes enormous mystery cuts in the budget. Chairman Ryan claims he can cut $900 billion of appropriated domestic spending over the next 10 years. That means border security. That means the FBI. That means medical research. That means student financial aid. That means the grants that support our efforts to combat violence against women. Under the extreme radical Republican budget, domestic discretionary spending will fall to its lowest level as a share of GDP since we started keeping track in 1962. 1962. There weren't even Pell Grants in 1962. There wasn't even Medicare in 1962. Their future is our distant past. Chairman Ryan would push $810 billion onto our states to shift costs to the states for Medicaid, and find another mystery $962 billion in unspecified entitlement grants. He boasts that the Republican budget repeals Obamacare, but he puts all the savings from Obamacare in the budget. He can't have it both ways. It's not even an honest budget. It's politically, mathematically, and logically unrealistic. It's not a balanced budget so much as magical thinking. Even if the unrealistic program cuts in the Republican budget could be made, the plan ignores the economic damage that would result. We have had the austerity experience. We have had the austerity experience in Europe, and the evidence is in. Deep austerity cuts in Spain, Greece, and Portugal caused persistent double-digit unemployment and negative growth rates. We may be impatient with our unemployment rate. We may be impatient with our low positive economic growth rate, but the countries that tried what the Republicans want to do have double-digit, 26% unemployment rates, and their economic growth is negative. Their economies are shrinking. The Wall Street Journal just reported that industrial production in the UK, after its austerity plan, has fallen to its lowest level in 22 years, and the country is looking at a third recession. The Republicans who want to emulate European austerity should consider what Jeremy Warner said in the conservative Daily Telegraph. I quote, "This is a truly desperate state of affairs. We seem to have the worst of all possible worlds, with nil growth, some very obvious cuts in the quantity and quality of public services, but pretty much zero progress in getting on top of the country's debts." That should be a warning. Not only is the Ryan Republican budget's magical thinking unrealistic, it's unfair. It achieves 100% of its deficit reduction by cutting government programs that benefit lower and middle income Americans, while doing nothing, not one dime, from wealthy Americans or corporations. In fact, it would cut the high-end tax rates for corporations and wealthy individuals. It adds more tax breaks for the rich and well-connected and goes after the lower and middle-class families. The Republican budget cuts total education and workforce training, for instance, by an estimated 47%. It cuts $135 billion out of the food stamp program, which helps feed the poorest Americans. And at the same time, if you're making over $1 million, it offers you an average budget cut of a tax cut of $330,000. And for the kind of money that the Ryan Republican budget wants to give to the rich and the well-connected, they have to come after the middle class. Chairman Ryan's tax cut would require $5.5 trillion in new revenue. And to cover that price tag, President Clinton revealed the hard truth. I'll quote President Bill Clinton. They'll have to eliminate so many deductions, like the ones for home mortgages and charitable giving, that middle-class families will see their tax bills go up. That's the promise of the Ryan Republican budget. Middle-class families will see their tax bills go up. We don't. We take 7% out of that, which means we can focus on the corporate tax spending, we can focus on the high-end deductions, on the carried interest exception, so we don't have to go after the middle-class tax cuts. Let me close by reading one thing, if I may have consent. We have just welcomed a new pope. The Conference of Catholic Bishops had this to say about the Ryan budget last year. Congress faces a difficult task to balance needs and resources and allocate burdens and sacrifices. Just solutions, however, must require shared sacrifice by all, including raising adequate revenues, eliminating unnecessary military and other spending, and fairly addressing the long-term costs of health insurance and retirement programs. The House-passed budget resolution fails to meet these moral criteria. I yield the floor.
Senator from Delaware.
Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor for an address by a member of the opposite party.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
I'll plead to yield up to 10 minutes to Senator Cruz of Texas.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I want to thank my friend from Rhode Island for his stirring remarks and indeed his powerful argument against this nation going down the road of Greece and Spain and much of Europe. Those were indeed compelling statistics of 27% unemployment in Greece and negative nearly 7% growth in Greece. And I found myself moved looking at those statistics that all of us should act and act with leadership to prevent going down that road, to stop the out-of-control spending, the out-of-control debt that put Greece and Spain in those circumstances. We are right now in a situation where our nation faces debts larger than our entire economy, greater than 100% of our entire economy. That's where the United States is right now. And I would suggest the irresponsible policies of this Congress and this administration is why we are seeing stagnant growth. Last quarter, our economy grew 0.1%. And I found my friend from Rhode Island's speech was quite powerful for arguing why every member of this body should vote against the Democratic budget that will be coming up for a vote. Because it is clear that raising taxes $1.5 trillion on top of the $1.7 trillion tax increase that has already been put in place will only accelerate our path to where Greece and Spain and much of Europe is. Adopting a budget that never balances in perpetuity, as sadly the Democrat budget does, will only accelerate our path to where Greece and Europe is. So I thank my friend for that stirring recitation. I would note also that tomorrow is an important milestone. Tomorrow is the 3-year anniversary of the adoption of Obamacare. And as we vote later today, I will be introducing an amendment to establish a deficit-neutral reserve fund to provide for the repeal of Obamacare. Obamacare was passed with many promises, and yet the reality, it has not delivered. When Obamacare was being proposed, the President told Americans the average American family would see our premiums drop by $2,500. Instead, today, the average American family has seen our premiums rise by $3,000. That's a $5,500 difference between what was promised and what has been delivered. Young people in particular have been hit incredibly hard by Obamacare. The actuaries predict that young people trying to climb the economic ladder could see their premiums rise anywhere between 145% and 189%. Seniors also have been hit severely by Obamacare. As a result of Obamacare, 14 million, nearly 15 million seniors are on Medicare Advantage. Half of them will lose their Medicare Advantage coverage as a result of Obamacare. 7 million seniors will lose Medicare Advantage, and I would note a very large percentage of those are low-income seniors, are Hispanic seniors, are African-American seniors. Every one of us should ask, when confronted with Hispanic seniors in our states, why is it that we are content to see 7 million seniors lose their Medicare Advantage program? I would suggest we should not be. Last Wednesday, all 45 Republicans stood united, voting in support of an amendment I offered to delay funding Obamacare at least until our economy gets growing. Our economy is stagnant right now. It is not growing. Last quarter, it was 0.1%. And sadly, every Democrat who voted to continue implementing Obamacare even as the economy is gasping for breath, and to risk very potentially knocking this nation into a recession. I would urge this body to reconsider that decision, and when so many people are hurting, not to put the kind of impact that could send this country backwards into a recession. Obamacare itself includes some 20 tax increases over $1 trillion, and many in this body talk about the middle class, though many of those tax increases fall directly on the middle class. Now, yesterday, over 70 members of this body voted against the medical devices tax. I celebrate that. That is a terrific recognition of the tax burdens of Obamacare, and I hope that that amendment is not simply voted on in an aspirational sense, but that it becomes law and we repeal that amendment. And yet, Mr. President, I would suggest the medical devices industry, a critical industry, employs a virtual army of lobbyists. The lesson yesterday illustrated is if you are wealthy, if you are connected, if you are an important industry with lobbyists that can get senators to come to cocktail parties, you too can see some of the burdens of Obamacare perhaps lifted from you. But as we voted for that, and I happily voted to lift that tax, it struck me, what about the millions of small businesses that don't have lobbyists in Washington, that don't have the ability to corral senators and say it is so important that this burden not fall on me? We respond quite rightly to the pleas from one powerful industry, and yet we ignore the pleas from the mom and pop shops, from the millions who are struggling. And I will note, if you look at the Hispanic community, there are 2.3 million Hispanic small business owners in this country. Roughly 1 in 8 Hispanic households is a small business owner. And you know what? They don't have lobbyists here that capture the attention of some 70 senators. Instead, they face the cost and the burdens from Obamacare. I want to just read to this body a couple of recent press stories illustrating that this is not a Republican talking point or a Democrat talking point. These are the facts. This is what is happening under Obamacare. The Associated Press, on March 13, 2013, so just earlier this month, reported, this is the opening line of the story, quote, "Some Americans could see their insurance bills double next year as the health care overhauls laws expands coverage to millions of people." It goes on to say the biggest price hikes are expected to hit a group that represents a relatively small slice of the insured population. That includes some roughly 14 million people who buy their own insurance, as opposed to being covered under employer-sponsored plans, and to a lesser extent, some employees of smaller companies. Yet again, the impact of Obamacare hitting small businesses, hitting the struggling entrepreneurs. And I would note, Mr. President, 2/3 of all new jobs in our economy come from small businesses. If this body continues to make it harder for small businesses to survive, we will continue to see 23 million Americans in this country out of work, because the new jobs are going to come from small businesses, and we cannot continue to put more and more costs and burdens on them. The Associated Press continued, young people who currently have low-cost coverage may see some of the biggest hikes. to all of the college kids right now who stood for hope and change, to all of the young people who coming out of school are struggling to find jobs and not able to find jobs right now. I would point out that what the Associated Press reported is that alone, the Obamacare impact, could cause the premium for a 24-year-old who pays $1,200 annually to jump to $1,800. As their premiums go up, as they see additional dollars taken out of their pockets, as they're struggling to climb the economic ladder. I hope that young people realize the cause for those impacts. Just this week, the Washington Post, hardly a bastion for conservative thought, had a major story headlined, "Healthcare Law Uncertainty Grips Old Town Alexandria Cafe and Other Small Businesses." And it explains that there is a cafe in Old Town Alexandria that employs 45 people. And the owner says there's tremendous confusion and fear among many of my competitors and other business owners, particularly about what you have to cover and how you have to report. I am convinced that the primary reason we aren't seeing a robust economic recovery is the uncertainty and costs associated with this health care law. This is from a small business owner saying, why don't we see growth? Why don't we see the economy booming? Because Obamacare stays in force and it is crippling jobs. The Washington Post continues that 1 in 8 small business owners who responded to a survey by the National Federation of Independent Businesses said their health insurance providers had notified them their plans would be terminated. 1 in 8 small businesses. A study released last week by Adecco, a human resources consulting firm.
Allotted.
Very good. I would urge that Obamacare be repealed, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Delaware.
Thank you. I yield 5